You mad, bro? Well, lots of people have been. 2016, it's been an angry year to be on the internet, and not just during the primary and the election, which pit Bernie Kratz against Clintonistas, Never Trump against Make America Great Again, and then, of course, the angriest presidential election since, well, probably since the last one at least. And thrown into the mix, we had perhaps the most vicious year in America's unending culture wars, maybe since 1968. But the election ended and we entered the Christmas and Hanukkah season, and I thought how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, and oh boy, was I wrong. I'm Steve Green with the right angle on getting all worked up over nothing at all. And with me, of course, Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. All right, gents, three stories, or should I say the reaction to three stories, caught my eye, and this was all just this morning. The first story concerns, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Niloufar Rahmani, a beautiful 25-year-old Afghan woman who just happens to be that country's first female Air Force pilot. She's just wrapping up a 15-month stint with the U.S. Air Force here in this country, but has applied for asylum due to death threats from her own people back home in Afghanistan. And you know what? I waded into the comments of the story, and what I found shocked me. Now, there was plenty of anger, but most of it was not at the 7th century barbarians threatening to murder this brave young woman. The anger, and this is from Americans who would be fortunate to have a woman like this stay here, were angry. They were angry because she might be allowed to stay, that it would somehow be more just if she got her throat slit by jihadis than to add her skills and her perseverance and beauty to the American melting pot. And I won't even try to tell you the kind of language that was being used, the hate and the vitriol. Bill, I don't necessarily want to talk about the facts of this story or start an argument about it. Instead, I want to ask you why. Why do people look so hard for things to be angry about? Is this something unique to the internet?
It is unique to the internet. I think for conservatives, it's 8 years of Obama and waking up every day to see some new catastrophe and travesty happening. And so you get to the point where you expect to see them, and then unfortunately you get to the point where you start seeing them when they aren't there. Many times I've had people email me some story about Obama that wasn't true. And my response would be, we don't need to spread this story. There's enough about him that is true that's, perfectly reprehensible. But I think over time, Steve, what happens is you just get your claws out. You're just ready to fight everything. So many people just have a voice on the internet, or it's the only voice they have, and they're pretty used to shouting back now after 8 years of this, and they're pretty angry, and they're pretty what's the word I'm looking for? They're just very in the moment. The second thing really I think that's important, and this is really, I think, 80-90% of it, is the anonymity of the internet. Yeah. People will say things to you in a comment section that they never in a million years would say to you in person. Mostly because in person they realize that you're an actual person and you smile and you have kids, maybe maybe you're a Packers fan or something. So there's a human element there. But some of the things they wouldn't say in person, because if some of the people had said some of the things they've said about me in person, one of us or both of us are going to the hospital. So it's the anonymity of it, and it's the usually, when I say late at night, I mean kind of the late at night feel. You're connected to the entire world. You're talking to everybody on the planet. You're defending your ideas, and it's alarming. And we've seen a little bit of it with some of our show segments here. Let me just throw one last thing in here. In an era of ideological warfare that we live in, to admit that something that you've been using as a weapon is maybe not true is to suffer a defeat. It's the same thing as sending your guys off into some valley to be slaughtered someplace. Scott did a show last week about how it appears from Heritage Foundation study that voter fraud is not as nearly as prevalent as we thought, and certainly is not affecting the cause of elections. When I heard that news, I was a little angry, because I like my voter fraud argument. And I like being able to stand up in front of a group of people and say, my dad was voted Republican until the day he died and then started voting Democrat. But after that initial moment of my values are under attack, I remember thinking, well, if that's true, and it appears to be true, that's really, really good news. It's really good news. And that's one less thing we have to get all completely hyper about, and let's concentrate on the real problems, because God knows there's enough of those.
Yeah, Scott, my story number two is exactly what Bill was talking about. You hosted what I thought was a really interesting segment, and if I got the gist of it correct, you were saying that if voter fraud isn't as big a problem, then it might be smarter politically for the GOP to put it on the back burner and focus more on winning over minority voters who rightly or wrongly feel threatened by voter ID laws and the like. Now, I don't mean to critique BillWhittle.com viewers and members, who, after all, are, of course, the smartest and best informed people on the internet.
That's
but
right.
your of course, but your segment got a lot of our viewers awfully angry. And reading the comment, they seem mostly angry about things you didn't say, about points you didn't make. And they had good points to make. They just didn't address your arguments. So here we are with legions of intelligent and generally like-minded viewers, and yet we still manage to talk right past each other. So again, without getting into last week's talking point or trying to insult people, is there something about the internet that makes it feel so good to feel so bad?
Well, first of all, I never try to insult people. It just happens naturally. I have a gift.
I do it on purpose.
But yeah, I think, in fact, one of our commenters somewhere that I saw, I forget where this was now, Facebook or maybe at BillWhittle.com, expressed something that I thought was pretty sharp. And basically he said, we can't give an inch on any of these things to these people because they'll eat us alive. And so and frankly, I blame myself. I mean, over the last 8 years or so, I have helped to foster an atmosphere of kind of, dueling to the death kind of political interchanges. I've certainly done my share of ridiculing people on using satirical things in text and on video. And so I don't blame somebody for saying, look, it's possible that upon further it's like upon review, the play on the field, the call on the field has been overturned. It's possible that we might want to overturn a call on the field, but we realize that if we give an inch, the other side has no goodwill, no good faith. They are not going to give, and so it will only weaken us. And that's tough. That's hard to come to grips with that, because I really believe that you can give an inch, so to speak, on matters of tactics, of strategy, of methods. But methods are many and principles are few. Methods always change, principles never do. And so I don't think that we don't have to sacrifice the principle, for example, of rule of law to be able to say, on a political basis, if the data show that what we thought was happening isn't happening to the extent we thought it was, then are we willing to be flexible in the tactics? And I think you lose battles when you ally yourself with the tactics rather than the principles. You wind up being, like sort of the parody of the British in the Revolution, where all they could do is line up in their red coats and be mowed down by the guys hiding behind rocks. I think you have to be willing to look at the situation and go, you know what? I don't think that method's working out so well. Maybe we should consider something else. Again, without discussing the specifics of that case. And I also think, frankly, there's something inside that feels good about being mad. I mean, there's a little adrenaline rush that you get from, it's first anger is almost the highest, and then you have, marital intimacy that goes beyond that. But it's a thrill, and we don't want to give that up so easy.
I just want to add one thing, if that's okay. I agree completely with what Scotty just said, but I think the main reason why we need to discipline ourselves to look at things that we may not want to see or hear because they run contrary to our deepest, beliefs, is because the reason I love conservatism so much is because it's correct. It's just correct. It's the way the world is actually built. And if it turns out there's a couple of assumptions or a couple of heuristics in there that I'm working with that are not correct, I want to correct them. I want the accurate information. Yeah. And I want to be able to make arguments that way. And I don't want to become one of these people who can't face reality and therefore can't debate their way out of a paper bag.
Yeah, and it's a real shame, too, because there's nothing as enlightening as a good, solid discussion by people who are being reasonable. And sometimes we miss that in all of this. And I want to engage more and not recoil. And there's room for all of us on that. All right, that brings us to story number 3, which was interesting, but not as interesting as some of the reactions. The story was from the New York Times, headlined, "Sorry Liberals, Bigotry Didn't Elect Donald Trump." Now, polls conducted after the election show that about 1 in 5 voters had an unfavorable view of both candidates as people, but an overwhelming majority of those voters picked Trump. And get this, that was enough to hand him the White House. In other words, all those Trump supporters who said that being nice was no way to win, well, they were right. But here's what one of those Trump supporters said to me about it. "Analysis? Bull. Come on, Green. You're going to subscribe to post-election NYT analysis of the polls? Those polls that prove so totally biased and inaccurate? Analysis that unsurprisingly imply Trump really didn't win because Hillary was worse? Please." Now, I'm not going to get angry. I'm not even going to correct the reader, who I'm sure meant well. I just want to say this. When you're getting angry about being proven right, maybe it's time to rethink a few things about how you approach the internet. And you know what? That includes me, because I'm actually paid to get angry about the news and share that anger with others. So my New Year's resolution is this. Before I write anything, I'm going to take a deep breath, reread what I just read, and ask myself if I'm getting angry because there's something to be angry about, or if I'm just doing it out of habit. Maybe you'll join me. I hope so. Please. And that's the right angle on making hate out of nothing at all. Brought to you with Seething Resentment by the members of BillWhittle.com. We'll see you next year. I hope it's a happier one.
Traitor.